Hello and welcome to Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 92 with Gary Lee, VFX extraordinaire and digital cinematographer for The Magician's Elephant. Enjoy. Are you watching anything interesting right now?
I started Last of Us, and
there we go.
It was mainly, that was a video game I played. But it was okay. I can kind of rewind back to growing up, playing a ton of video game, entering high school, entering college, kind of just shut the whole video game thing down because realizing I'm being super unproductive, spending all this time in the industry over the years, like seeing people, gameplays of like GTA 5, all this game that the video game cinematic, the graphics are becoming so sophisticated.
Yeah.
I think it was like a couple of years back, I was like, I should kind of play video game just to understand what we're dealing with right now. And got introduced to the whole open world thing, and then Last of Us was one of those video games I played at that time, where it just blew my mind in terms of the storytelling aspect of it. And yeah, that was I got really into the story, Last of Us, and during that whole period, I got into that GTA 5 with a few other video games. I quickly shut it down again because I was like, okay, oh my God, I'm just burning hours of my life doing this.
Red Dead 2.
I didn't even attempt to, download that because I know it's just gonna
way too big.
And I have friends that were in like World of Warcraft and, like some game that, just becomes a take your life away. Cut to present, Last of Us coming out as a TV show. I thought the cast was fantastic. So I was like, me and my wife now married with 2 kids, 1 daughter, turn on the first episode. And then the girl showed up. I was like, oh no, because I know what was going to happen. But I had played that game when I didn't have a family, and now suddenly it just becoming so much harder to digest. So pretty much after the first episode, we like kind of go, do we want to continue on this? Maybe yes, no. And I decided to keep going forward because, this is kind of what I do. But my wife, kind of taking a break from it. And I would say the latest episode I saw was episode 3, which is the episode
devastating.
That didn't have any of the crazy violence or the clickers, all of that. And it's by far my favorite episode of the season so far. But that's how far I've gone at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're on, for timeline's sake, for people listening, we're on episode 7 that's just come out.
Oh my God, I'm behind.
And I'm telling you, man, it doesn't get easier. Episode 3 is particularly devastating, but it's not like it doesn't suddenly become roses after that. Like,
I love how they suddenly just introduce these 2 characters that you have no context of, and you go through their entire life.
It's amazing world building.
Oh, amazing world building. So good. So good. And that was something that was never in the game. And I love that about it but man, the first pilot, I was like, I don't want to be watching. It's the right.
So I had to convince my girlfriend that it was worth watching because, she's not as into film and television as I am. And I was like, well, it's about this guy and this girl, and he's got to transport this girl somewhere, and there's a lot of, and so we're getting through the first episode, and his daughter fucking gets shot, and she was like, I thought you said it was about a guy and his daughter. I said it was about a guy and a girl. I didn't say which one.
Yeah, no, it needed to happen for his character building, all of that, but I just wasn't ready to see something like that, having a daughter now. Yeah.
It's a tough show. I have.
What are you watching?
Last of Us is up there right now. I'm kind of going through this I feel like I've said this a lot on this podcast, so it's a long kick, but I've been going through like 90s action movies kind of kick, or like, you know, like stuff like The Running Man, or like going back and just rewatching Air Force One, because I'm trying to like go through.
Air Force One's a good one. Yes.
But it's like, I'm trying to think like, were these good or was I a teenage boy? You know, and sometimes it's good and sometimes I was a teenage boy. You know, like The One is like, there's both. The One is like really good and also horrific. Like the fucking butt rock, just like dumb, you know, putting he's fighting people and they're playing Bodies by Drowning Pool. You're like, okay, this is very early 2000s. Like this was that weird era of just bro chacho-ness.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that whole, like the Jet Li time in, you know, the American cinema.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The Jet Li era.
The Jet Li era.
He was in a lot of stuff, wasn't he?
Yeah. Romeo Must Die.
Romeo Must Die. And man, I was just watching an interview with what's his name? The older guy who was in Rogue One. He doesn't look older. He looks like Donnie Yen.
I was almost gonna do a project with him actually. I got to meet him in person for this potential project that we're gonna do. Super nice guy, you know. I still think that it's like his time right now, you know. Yeah. John Wick 4, and he's been in many things. Yeah.
Do you find you're a little more in touch with this being on your side of things, but like in the past like year, I've started to really get excited about things that are coming out. Like projects seem to be more interesting. Like I think the past decade we've suffered through a lot of sameness. And Everything Everywhere is like a good example of probably what's kicking off more interest in, let's say, weirder shit. But like, it does feel like there's kind of been this groundswell of like interesting projects that have started to come out over the past like 3-5 years, something like that.
Sure. And it was interesting that you bring up Everything Everywhere All at Once, because I remember going to the theater, like Alamo's Draft House,
nice,
to watch not for that film, for the Batman, this Batman film, and that poster was everywhere, you know, Everything Everywhere, and it was just so fascinating, that particular poster, the way it was designed with Michelle Yeoh, and it was always, I remember that image made me really want to check out the film, and just because of circumstantial, and didn't get to it until it was really popular, until everyone was raving about it. So I started teaching recently at USC, like for their, like as a cinematography class for animation for the first time. That was my first ever experience. And in the class, I asked, like, what was the film that, you know, you guys all got super excited about these days? And everyone's like, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And they're like, you have to go watch it. And I felt like I was really behind the curve. I have to say, I watched it, and I felt like I was not the audience that was like, got blown away by it. And I don't know if it was because I was behind the curve, that Yao already has, you know, such a huge following, and, you know, it was just like really hyped up, and every person I talked to spoke about it in such a high praise that perhaps it has normalized it for me a little bit.
I think that makes total sense, because seeing that movie, I got to interview the DP of that film, and so I went to an advanced screening. So he and I were talking about it, and he was, you know, the chat was basically like, well, I hope it does. I hope people like it. You know, like there was no, and then actually, speaking of podcasts coming out late, that one came out April. So it was like, there was a stupid reason why it got, I shouldn't say stupid. There was a reason why it got delayed, but I should say like a non-consequential reason why it got delayed. And so it's funny to re-listen to that one and go like, we were talking about it not knowing, and then it got released. The podcast got released when the film was like, you know, getting Oscar noms and stuff.
Great.
But also to the point of you teaching, because I did want to ask about that. that film reminds me so much of the stuff I wanted to make in college that it makes total sense that college students get stoked on seeing that in a theater. That kind of ridiculous but well-made thing was like right up my alley. If that came out when I was in college, that would be my favorite movie by far.
Sure. I can see that. And it was like overwhelming reception, like across the board. It wasn't even just like half of the class. It was like 85% of the class. And me watching the film, I think that, I don't know how you feel about it, but parts of it really reminded me of like 12 Monkeys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They borrow from a lot of things in that film.
Like Terry Gilliam films. And I was mentioning to my students, like, hey, have you guys seen 12 Monkeys? Like, you know, Brazil, like this type of films. And just a new generation of kids, they've never seen that before. I was like, you should check that out. And maybe there's like, you see this, you know, there's some inspirations that came from that. Don't get me wrong, I love their work. Like Swiss Army Man, I was like the one in the theater just grinning, you know, from beginning to end, be like, who the hell makes this? And this is so awesome that this existed, you know. And by all means, I'm not trying to, you know, underplay the achievement, you know, of everything everywhere all at once.
Some things are for you.
Me, it was just like, I felt like it was a party that's going on that I wasn't invited to. I was just like, you know, checking it out from the outside. But I'm so glad that it's doing very well. I love the fact that the male lead, who was from Indiana Jones back in the days.
I keep forgetting what order his name is supposed to go in, which is very Anglo-centric of me. But yeah, Key, whatever.
Yes, that's right. And it's just so nice to see him, you know, I mean, he has such a talent that just kind of was forgotten for decades. And
he's been doing fight choreography this whole time.
No shit.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to say that?
Yeah, you can say the fuck word. You can say whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's so the advanced screening I went to.
So that's why he's so good as well as like a martial artist. Because I was like, did he train for this? Like, did they? Because you never know, you know. Sometimes they can just somehow be coming it out in like a month. Yeah.
No, he's been doing fight choreography this whole time, and the advanced screening I went to was like a Q&A as well. And this one line that Michelle Yeoh said that I've got a kick out of was, some girl had asked like, oh, like, you were really good at like some of the fight stuff in this movie, you know, like how'd you get there? How do you maintain that? And she goes, well, when you wake up, do you like brush your teeth? She goes, yeah. And she goes, yeah, I do karate. It's like, yeah, like that one was intense, like in a good way. She doesn't fuck around.
Well, it reminds me of the conversation I had the opportunity to have with Donnie Yen. That, you know, when he first, because he kind of grew up. I believe he either went to Hong Kong at a very young age or he came to the States at a very young age. But his mom, who's like in performance art, like martial arts, would get him up as a kid, like 5 a.m. to just practice martial arts like every single day. He hated it. It was so cold, you know, has to get up in the morning, first thing you do. But that's what made him who he is today. Yeah.
And he's
craft, you know.
And I don't know if this is part of it, but that man is almost 60 years old and he looks my age. And I look 20 years older than I should look. I don't take
myself. Probably said there's which just does not exist on an Asian person's spaceship. Like I tried to do, like for you, that's probably what, like a week. Like this is like 2 weeks.
Yeah. My friend Nick Mim is half Asian, and yeah, he just gets these little wisps. But because he looks white, and so everyone's like, "Why can't you?" And he's like, "Bro, it's the other half. The other half's fucking up my facial hair game."
I tried for sure. Like my wife is Caucasian, and sometimes I'm like, "Yeah, what do you think about this facial hair?" And she's just like,
"Yeah, you get
what? What are you talking about?" Yeah.
I did want to ask though, because you brought up being a professor at USC, and I suppose you kind of answered that. I was going to ask like what what the kids are into right now, like what films are they talking about, but kind of got there. I did want to ask, because it was specific to what you do, and I've been talking about it. A lot of people have been talking about it very recently on like YouTube and Twitter, and that is if you have any thoughts or opinions on the introduction of AI workflows into animation. Because there's a large like plagiarism question and things like that. And I was wondering from your perspective, because I've been arguing from a creative's perspective, but I don't know how it looks on the animator's side, you know?
Well, it was really interesting because when I was teaching that class, that's when Midjourney came out. It's just like one of those like Dolly, you know, like all those AI generated arts that you
Stable diffusion.
Exactly. You can write prompts and very quick. I have a director friend who's really, really into that. Yeah. And he's just been generating a ton of content just for fun, just to like kind of get his brain going and, you know, exercise his mind. I tap into it for a while and parts of it feel like it's incredibly powerful. Like, you know, as someone who is putting together a pitch deck, or you want to do some sort of concept paintings to just kind of get the mood of the project that you're trying to pitch, I can totally see a scenario where, you know, instead of hiring a concept artist, you'll start using something like Midjourney to just generate the first few pages and kind of see what sticks on the wall. And once you start refining it, then eventually you can hire someone who does it in a more precise manner. But in a way, it's all entirely possible that it's just like the very first versions. Like eventually you can get to a place where you can really carry you for that last 10% of the final refinement into it. I always joke about in a few years, like I'll be talking to my computer and said, okay, we want a tracking shot following our and you know, the character with medium 50mm lens, you know, 4 feet away from him. And as he gets to that first bedroom, you know, camera pan right to reveal this person. And like you can, which is really scary. And it's like, I feel like the future is you'll have a DP, production designer, director, writer, like you have probably like a handful of people that can just go and lock themselves in their cabin for a weekend. At the end of that, there's like a feature film gets made, you know?
Right.
Like that is a very much a possible future. Excuse me. So the moment Midjourney came out, I was in the middle of teaching the very first class I ever taught. I just brought it to the class. I say, hey, this is what you guys are going to be up against.
Right.
All of you are going to graduate. You guys are all incredibly brilliant students at USC. And all your craft has been honed in over the years. And some of these, since it's an animation class, a lot of students are into storyboards. They want to be story artists. They want to tell, like they're still kind of in that, like doing comic book, you know, like type of stage. There's a few students in there that tap into doing 3D animation, you know, using Maya, using software, using Unreal Engine to create content. For me, I have no qualms of which medium you choose. Ultimately, it comes down to what kind of visual storytelling you're doing and whether there's an intention behind what you're creating. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, well, you're going to be up against, you know, this thing that even I start thinking about for my kids. What is the craft that they will have to get into in the future that might not be able to get, you know, displaced by AI? And I feel like the conclusion I took away from all of this, you know, the ongoing conversation of AI, you know, there's like this particular podcast I listen to called All In with like 4 tech, you know, funders that are always talking about what's up and coming. And one particular post on it named Freebird had talked about the skill set that he's now telling his kids, in which I believe is the right one, which is that your job is to have the ability and have the curiosity to continue to relearn in your life. Don't just think about, like, I think back in the days, people would go, I'm going to be an illustrator, and then you hone your craft, you spend years to perfect that very style, and that becomes your life, that becomes your legacy. And it's entirely possible that that can be quickly and easily replaced. And what is the next thing? Like, how do you continue to utilize them continuously as tools for your art rather than being, replaced by them?
Yeah. Well, so the thing, it's interesting you bring that up, because one thing that literally today I was playfully arguing with someone about, but I'm kind of, I won't color your opinion before we talk about it. But do you know that the guys Corridor Digital, they're pretty, I feel like, well known in the VFX space at this point.
I feel like channel for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So they're some like independent VFX guys. They have a YouTube channel. And so what they did was they were able to, like, the skill that it took for them to do this cannot be overstated. But what they did was they filmed themselves, and then they trained an AI on a very specific anime, and then had that AI overlay their live video with that anime style. And then they made a short. And it looks pretty good. It's quite convincing. And so there was this big kind of two-sided uproar. On one side, people are saying, oh, this is going to democratize animation. And then the other side saying, this is straight up plagiarism, because they trained it on this one anime. So, like, the thing that I'm kind of curious about from your end is, because I went to, at ASU, our whole thing was ethics-based filmmaking. And so, for weirdly enough, this is the one time where I'm like, an ASU education is helping me with this conversation. Where do you see the ethics in independent creators utilizing a tool like that to ostensibly lift someone else's artistic style versus allowing their stories to be told in a way that is, as they've said, high quality, like the big leagues, because that was a big thing with like digital cameras. Nicer digital cameras allowed people to make indie stories that looked like what you saw in theaters. So I guess my question to you is, do you see this kind of AI overlay type thing as an extension of that or something different?
It's all really messy, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, of course.
I can see it from both sides. I really can. I think Getty Images has just won some lawsuits because, I think certain AI, was basically taking Getty Images and using that as like crawl the entire library of it. And sometimes that's why you see like the watermarks on these like Mid-Journey things. That's like really weird. And it's like, oh, this is like definitely a watermark from one of these like companies. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Like they spent all this time to build this library, from really hiring photographers, go out, shoot stock footage, all of that. And now they are, just completely being utilized by a, AI software company. In a part of it, I have a friend who's a director. His name is David Slade. It's a pretty good. We'll get together sometimes, grab coffee, and talk about this. And I remember him making a point that resonated with me, was that back in the days, people were doing paintings, and suddenly you have your first camera that came out, and people are just taking like one snap, you got a whole picture, right? And you were like, that's cheating. How can you that? You just take this box around, you press a button, and then that's your art. That's ridiculous, right? Like, art is oil painting or some sort of illustration that takes craft, all of that. But it is until later that people go, oh, that just taking a photo doesn't mean anything. It's like, now, why are you taking that photo? What's the meaning behind what you're trying to capture, what is the story behind it, like that derive into its own artistic narrative that didn't. And I think throughout human civilization, there's just these many milestones that at first would feel like, oh, this is very problematic. And eventually it is all overcome by its like natural evolution of what it ended up becoming. Although even on that note, I still think that AI today is very different. Like AI today is taking it to a whole other level. I remember there was like an artist, sorry, I'm like blinking on names a lot today.
Me too.
It was an illustration, and there was a female artist who had done this, had a very distinct style, and people were prompting in her name, her style to create art that is like, I believe she's Jewish, and the art that people are generating was like, Nazi related stuff, and you're just like, whoa, that's exactly what she doesn't ever want her art to be, right?
Using her voice to
using her voice,
never say.
And then to the untrained eye, they'll be like, oh, so that's what she's about. That's interesting, and it does change that narrative. So we're in this uncharted territory that really, on the legal standpoint, how do you even sort through? I wonder if there will be some sort of imprint to those generated art that can be detected by, computer, that can be like, oh, this is a AI generated art versus a, human generated art. What do you? I'd love to know what you think about it after, talking to so many people.
So my position initially was pretty vehemently anti. It's so new that I didn't have enough time to talk. I'm trying to, over the past many years, trying better to listen and work on stuff before I start talking about it with any authority, which I think is very hard in especially like the kind of YouTube social media era where it's like you learn something and then you immediately want to turn around and tell people because that's how you get clicks or whatever.
Interesting.
But I think the tool itself is not problematic. It is the way that certain people are seeing it as an intro. So like this one specific example of stealing, what I would say is stealing someone's look to make something else. I think that's a hard no. Right. But if you were to, let's say, if we want to use animation as the example, I think it's perfectly acceptable to train an AI on your own drawing style and then overlay that on video you shot. And then that way you can animate a whole thing without needing an animation studio. I think that is democratizing of animation.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like training your virtual assistant.
Yeah. But I do see right now the sort of, I don't want to lump everyone together because I don't know enough about the AI art community, but there's, let's do it. Right now they seem kind of like the NFT community where it's just a lot of like, you guys are going to, you're getting your comeuppance now that I can make something rad, so they'll train it on, you're saying some famous artist and then they'll make their own thing in that style and they go, look, I'm an artist. And I'm like, no, you made a pretty picture. The same thing happens with cinematography. You see people buy a red and then they go, look, I can make pretty pictures. I'm a filmmaker. And you're like, no, you made a pretty picture. There has to be there does seem to be a kind of neo-anarchist position in art right now, which is like whoever can make the best looking thing wins, and anything that came before is old bullshit.
Yeah, you know what? You're totally right about that. And funny enough, I started my career at Lucasfilm with some of the top like illustrator in the business
on Star Wars 2, right?
Star Wars 2, it was like the dream come true to be there, and it was with people like Doug Chang, Ryan Verge, Eric Timmon, and I was an illustration major at Art Center Pasadena. That it was very impactful to meet them and be like, okay, maybe I should think about doing something else. Like these guys are just way too good. But
you were in the same room.
Well, I was there doing something else, but no, I was very lucky. I feel that it was a journey that got me there, that it was like the beginning of what previs is, you know, as a business, as like the industry, period. But I don't tend to tell a lot of people this. Like, my major was illustration, and very quickly at age of 19, meeting like the top people, it actually gave, it was a negative experience that made me feel like, wow, that is a huge hill to climb in order to get to that place. And that was during the time that I was in the crossroad of going, am I doing traditional illustration or even digital illustration, or am I doing this thing called digital cinematography, which really never existed before? And I end up going down the path of digital cinematography.
Right.
And
digital meaning in computers, not like digital cameras. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. On computer, which is previs at the time, which is animatic at the time, which in animation, they call it layout at the time. The terminology keeps changing because it was just like such a new way of like pre-visualizing a film through animation. Over the years, like, many people were surprised that was my major illustration. They're like, Gary, I never knew you know how to draw. And because I just don't advertise it.
Right.
And my craft of illustration was still half-baked because I was in school halfway through learning my craft. I got my first job, I started working. Until very recently, since this whole mid-journey, since this whole AI thing, I'm beginning to, for the first time in my entire life, I started to post my own illustrations on Instagram, because I'm like, this might not be the best work that's out there on this planet, or like that came from people, but this is like done. This is like part of me as like the record of, you know, a creation that is very real, you know, like it's unfiltered, it's unaltered. And for some reason, it kind of weirdly made me becoming more open about, you know, sharing my human created art, you know, and it's just so easy to make perfect art now. I can type it like 5 words, it's a perfect art. And if I go, the resolution is not high enough, I type 1 more word and the resolution is high enough. And I'm actually starting to look for those imperfections and be like, what is it that make me as a human being that really matters, that I want to share it to the world and be okay with it? You know, there's a lot of people that does amazing mid-journey or, you know, AI art. And sometimes I'm like, yes, I know you can think. I know you can type. Yes, I understand. Like, you go to a vocab, you know, you go to the encyclopedia, you randomly like point 2 words, it's going to give you something. Like, good job. You can pick random words and come up with something unique. But I think there's still something of like the execution of the idea that now I'm giving it more weight than ever. You know, like, everyone can come up with ideas, but then how do you execute it to get there to become a thing that people digest in the way that you intended people to digest? That to me is like now way more interesting.
Yeah, no, it's kind of something that I've also been, I agree with you 100%. Like, I think it's almost the JFK quote thing of like, you do it because it's hard. Like, what makes us human versus just brains in jars is like the ability to do these things and hone a craft, and in that time come up with, and these are my opinions, but come up with what your voice is going to be and how you're going to communicate an idea or a thought. You know, and we've seen the same thing with like photography. You know, people are becoming far more interested in film photography now because it's difficult, because it takes time and expertise. See the same thing with like, you know, like carpentry now, I've noticed, is like starting to really come back, and kind of these artisanal things are becoming more popular, because I think at our core, we recognize that doing these things is difficult, and that shows skill. Like, you would never say like, oh, I've got a real skateboarder here and I've got a guy playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. They're the same. It's the same trick, right? You know, they're both doing a 900.
Yeah. I think there was an interview recently. Someone's like, "Oh, are you afraid of AI?" And you're like, "Well, AI is only generating what has ever come before, right? Like it doesn't have the imagination to create what is new to come." And I think there's some truth to that, although I have to say some of this AI are very sophisticated. They're doing some pretty new stuff. Yeah.
How have the tools changed? Kind of on the same topic. How have the tools for you changed? Going from your episode 2 to like Life of Pi or even beyond? Because I imagine every film you've worked on, there's been a new set of tools that you've been given access to that have helped you in your career, or even in just that job that you're doing.
Oh yes, no. I mean, I'm continuing being thankful for all these companies that keeps pushing the envelope and giving us more and more better tools over time. But one particular software that's always been consistent is really Maya. That's Maya. That was there since I was at episode 2 to, Kung Fu Panda, to Life of Pi, to Magician's Elephant, to even now. But now I'm the head of cinematography at Sony, and recently with certain studios, for the first time, I'm seeing big industry change of going into game engine.
Unreal 5.
Something like that. And that is probably going to be the most significant change to come, and for the right reasons. I think Unreal 5 really feels like a technology that falls out from the back of an alien spaceship.
Yeah.
The Nanite and Lumen, how they can calculate just millions of geometries of you can load the entire city.
Yeah, I played that Matrix demo for the PS5 and I was like, this is actually insane. Because you can turn on, like, for those who haven't played it or don't have a PS5, you can turn on the overlay that shows you like how Nanite works or how all these geometries work. And you can see it in real. They just delete the skins and just leave the bones and you can see it all. It'll give you a layout of, did you play this thing? Am I speaking to the choir?
No, I have. Yeah. I
okay. Yeah.
Downloaded it. Yes. And no, it's incredible. I think it does make me question whether we are just in a simulation or something.
Yeah, I've seen some articles like that. Yeah. This is further proof that we're close.
Oh, totally. It makes perfect sense. I think, especially with Unreal 5.1, they're operating with physical lighting. They have the sun. You can dial up and dial down the atmosphere, the density of the fog, how much cloud is in the sky, and by the amount of cloud, it also gives you different quality of shadows, and you can literally have one single light of that. You can literally have an enclosed room with one window, and you can have all the balances of lights that calculate accurately in that room. And if you want to just have a subject in there and be like, oh, why don't I just put a card next to his face to get that feel? It's calculating that in real-time physical world space.
Which, because back in the day, you had to place invisible lights all over the place, right?
Yes.
Like in any animation, it was always, you have a scene light source. I'm kind of trying to explain this for people listening, but you have a light, whatever, the sun. And then in the scene, there's 15 other little lights that are invisible to the renderer, but affect the subject.
There's no such thing as real bounce lights. Every single bounce lights are a very tiny intensified point light or something. But for layout, in the animation, it's called layout. For live action, it's more called previs. And now I think most animation studio has called it previs now too. And then now they're being more favored into the wording of digital cinematography, which I think for the first time is kind of communicating what it actually is. Because in my career, in my life, I've had very difficult time telling people what I do. They're like, What? Like, what do you do? Even my parents, like, they think I'm an animator.
Dog, no one's parents knows what they do in a creative field.
And, but for previous, sorry, going back to it, is we actually don't care about the final visual fidelity of an image. Like, our job is really to think about the relationship between your camera and your subject in that environment, and looking at the story that's either coming from script or from storyboards, to try to explore and find opportunities that you can shoot in this environment before it kind of goes down to the production, to layout, to rest of the pipeline, for animation or for live action, which is more in the visual effects realm. So in a lot of ways, like, we can work with pretty rudimentary video game, figurines, environments that are still half-baked. And as long as we're telling some sort of story, and in that, our job is done. Like, our job is not to have like perfectly lumen shaded human character, because all the departments down the line will have the ability to do that, like the lighting department, the color keys coming from, production design. I'm speaking to the animation process at this moment, which is, the camera and lighting are usually divided into two different rounds. That's someone like me. Camera composition, what kind of movement, why do we do it? How do we want to stage our shoot? What's the camera language? All of that is kind of under my domain. But then lighting is handled by a totally different department that later on, at the very tail end of the pipeline, they get to do that final render. For the first time, I think Unreal is going to merge both of them together more, because now we get to play with lights in very real-time scenario, which we didn't get to do that before. Like, even if I try to come up with some sort of lighting, you're getting like 8 to 16 lights at most, and that you can kind of put a palette together. But now we get to really, light it, for what it is. It just comes down to, so what does that mean for the lighting department? Are we going to bring them up earlier to have that collaboration? So there's going to be this whole revamp of pipelines to come because of new technology. And it's a very exciting time, but it's also, I just feel like I'm always learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because that was kind of one thing I wanted to know, especially in previous, is like, how does what you do as a cinematographer differ from a, let's say, physical cinematographer? Because I know, that I can't remember what film, but someone was like, oh yeah, this animated film, the DP was Roger Deakins. And I was like, well, kinda. What did he come in and say? Because I saw an interview and he's like, I don't know, I told him I'd put the camera there, and then I left.
It's an interesting conversation. You're asking a lot of really good questions. On Light for Pi, we had previous like an hour and a half of the film before a physical camera was even appeared. I think they had determined that Claudio Mirandis was going to be the DP for the project, which super talented, and ended up winning this DP best cinematography for Light for Pi. And also right now with Top Gun Maverick, I think it's just like probably the most fun film last
Totally year. Yeah, absolutely.
So it was an honor to be able to like kind of work with him on Light for Pi during that time. But it was always an interesting thing that nowadays so many people touches the material before a camera actually comes on set. Light for Pi was, especially with all the ocean sequences, we previewed the whole thing, because part of it is to problem solve. You have a tiger and a boat in the ocean. Sometimes you're dealing with 6-foot waves. Sometimes you're dealing with 50-foot waves. you have different weather conditions, and how are you going to communicate that information to your crew without having animated out to be something that people can watch and be like, oh, I see what you're saying. Doing Life of Pi, when I first, it was Patrice Avery, a friend of mine at DreamWorks, who actually was talking to me about that project and sent me this script. I read the Life of Pi script and I didn't get it. It was a weird script because it was so technical in a lot of sense, you know, like the port side of the boat, the roar, you know, the life jacket and the vest, and it's like a lot of things that you really need to understand how the, you know, how
the pictures interact.
Yeah, the pieces that are interactive, the ship from that time, like there's a lot of things that just didn't have in my head, and it's until I was on that project with Bradley Alexander, who was a member of Halo Entertainment, which was a previous company that was started from the same group of people that from Lucasfilm. You know, when I first started my career, that piece by piece going through every scene, sitting down with Aang, helping him visualize those, that I'm beginning to see the whole picture come together. And so yeah, there was like a whole animated version of Life of Pi that no one got to see, and that was actually what ended up greenlighting the project. And you have, a real DP that comes on, and sometimes I wonder, when he comes on, you see like, dude, you guys already figured all this shit out. Like, what am I doing here? Is this boring for him? Like, I sometimes ask myself that question, where he is so used to that now because everything they do is either following the storyboards or following a previs. Because some of these like bigger budget films, you just don't show up on set and be like, I feel like I want to place the camera right here because it feels good. Like a lot of times you don't have the time to do that because millions of, thousands, hundreds of thousands of, dollars is getting burned like per day kind of thing. And so everything is down to such a surgical way to approach things that, so I do think that there's still two different crafts. Digital cinematography and real cinematography. I would never claim myself as like a director of photography on the physical set because we just work with such different tool sets, like to really carry the camera, like D can really operate his camera. There's no way I do that, but I can operate a shit out of a, Maya camera that makes it feel like there's a person behind it, and
that was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you're good. People are here to listen to you, not me. But I think I would still consider you a real cinematographer. I suppose my question was just more like, I guess in one way you said like you don't deal with lights as much,
Right.
You think about it, but it's not part of the program.
Yeah, we always try to find ways to have that be part of discussion, but it was never really falling under the responsibilities of like a head of layout or head of previs.
Right.
At least in the animation world. And in live action, certainly that's like a DOP's job. Yeah.
Yeah. So your thing is more compositional. But then it also makes me think like you get Claudio, like you were saying, is he bored or is he pissed off that like someone else already DP'd this? Like, if I showed up and they're like, here's where you're putting the camera, it's like, well, all right, but what do you need? You need me to say yes? Like, what do you need me to do?
Yeah, no, it's totally right. And I believe like, there are DPs that don't like that. There are DPs who love to shoot more organically, to like get onto the environment and really feel the light of that day and try to find things. And I think there's so much more opportunity to do stuff like that, like a more character-driven content, like Roger Deacon, for all the super cool Blade Runner projects or so on. I think like something like Sicario is so beautiful that is like, to me, just how he kind of utilizes the light and, in that part of the world, and really being like open to the weather conditions of that day, all that stuff. I had done a short film. I'd done a couple of short films, but one in particular named Aiden that we shut down, like it was a live action short film with, there was an animation component to it, but all the actors are, live action. Kevin Alejandro is a actor on it. We on the streets in downtown, and it was a chase. We're shooting things out of context, out of order, because that's very common in order to just, get the most out of that day. And suddenly, we were seeing that a storm was going to roll in, and at this time it's going to start raining. And if we don't get it done before that time, then suddenly you'll have this weird thing where the downtown turns from one shot of no rain into raining. Right. And it was just like became this ticking clock as we're trying to get all the footage. That kind of stuff you just don't get in animated films, right? Animated films, like I make the whole film in my sweatpants, in front of my computer. And so I think, yeah, like a younger version of myself, it's like, I want to go to like some crazy third world country that waiting at, the magic hour in the middle of nowhere for this like one beautiful shots. And now with kids and, family, I'm like, this is like actually pretty cool that I get to make the film just in my sweatpants, in front of the computer.
So are you able to do your job now? Like obviously most of us are working from home, but have you been able to stay there, or are you still going into an office, or is there some kind of hybrid work thing that you're doing with animation? Because I know all the editors that I've interviewed the last 2 years really actually shored up a lot of their workflows collaboratively, because they didn't have to be in the same office now, because one guy was using Discord as like an intercom. They've got Frame.io, you've got Evercast, fucking Google Drive, all these ways to in real time share assets and notes.
Yeah, no, I think the pandemic has changed the way we work significantly. I certainly right now companies are trying to get people back a little bit more.
Well, they're paying for that real estate.
Yeah,
how to get you back in? They got to make it worth it.
I'm able to do hybrid, go in a few days a week, but able to do most of what I need to do just in front of my computer. I think the whole my entire experience on Magician's Elephant was, I started working on that show like on the week of the lockdown. From that point on, it was like, wow, we have to figure out how to meaningfully work, have digital virtual production in a real way. And I think really from that point on, all the animation pictures overnight became virtual production. So that terminology has really kicked in because of pandemic more than like technology acceleration, is that really, I don't have a qualm, working from home. I do think you're losing a little bit of that like human interaction, that is unintended human interaction, that is very valuable. Like after you get off a meeting from a office with a group of people, when you're walking down the hallway, you're chatting about random things where you just don't get to do that when you're on a Zoom meeting that is like scheduled to, meeting's ended, goodbye guys, and everyone just like disappears, right?
Right.
So from a human to human relationship building aspect, I don't think is strong. But from a productivity standpoint, I find myself able to get actually more done and able to communicate more clearly through something like Zoom, because everyone gets such a clear view of what everyone's trying to show, and everyone can draw and annotate on it and make notes, and it just becomes a really kind of interactive session. Whereas like back then like being at a studio, yes, sometimes you go in for a meeting at the meeting room, but it's really the only person that's driving that meeting room, driving the projector, that has to control everyone else. It's just we are talking and there's people in the back that might not see the screen as clearly. And then also like when you try to get everyone there, a lot of people don't show up on time.
Yeah.
Zoom, for some reason, everyone shows up on time because you just have to like wake up and turn on your computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, it's kind of funny. This is almost like what we were talking about with the AI thing about like human artists, but in terms of like the human impact of being in person. But I remember when the pandemic first started and we were all like forced to be at home. I was interviewing someone who was the head of this animated show for Quibi, RIP, and they were saying how it was like same thing. They were more productive at home, but then they would like wrap a show, and they were a weekly show. Like they were animating every week, like South Park, where like they didn't back any.
Oh wow, like the whole pipeline.
Yeah, it was.
We turned something around in week. Okay.
Yeah. Because I think it had to, you know what it was? Is it was weekly horoscopes, but that was the bones for the story of their little animated thing. Anyway, cool. it was an interesting idea. But the thing that they said that they were missing was they would like wrap a show and then you would just log out and now you're time to go make spaghetti or whatever. There was no
like the celebratory.
Yeah, none of that.
Yeah, that is a little bit weird for sure. And I've talked to some friends that are doing kind of what I do, and nowadays, like a lot of people feel like it's just a blur. They're just hopping from content to different content, but they're in the same chair, they're in the same drive, the same room. Whereas, typically, historically, you jump from one studio to another studio, you have different offices, you have different equipments, and all of that becomes like timestamps of your experience over the years. I can see that. I can see that very much. And one thing to add also to that is during the pandemic, I've realized people who have like a unit, like a family unit, either you have, a significant other or someone who can endure the pandemic with you, they seem to thrive a lot better than like the single young people who are really by themselves and being locked in and definitely suffer during that time. And so I think it truly reflects differently between different people just based on their kind of family unit, and the support system that they have.
That makes total sense. Due to circumstances, my girlfriend moved in with me like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And now that you mentioned that, I'm like, that does make logging out, like being done, like I could continue to edit or whatever it may be. I do a lot of coloring. I did a lot of coloring over the pandemic, and now I'm still doing coloring. But younger me, without my girlfriend living with me, absolutely would have just gremlined all night and finished a project versus like, all right, you know what? It's 8:00. I should go eat dinner. Like I should go talk to, I haven't seen her all day, even if we're in the same house. That's a good point.
And you like that was, you would have a completely different lifestyle, like without that there, Yeah.
That is strange. That's one I'll have to think about. I did want to ask, being a sort of digital cinematographer, what were some of your cinematic influences? Like where do you see, because obviously with more traditional DPs, it's kind of like this look building thing, but since yours is so compositional and so like the essence of cinematography, like what do you look at as like great cinematography that's inspired you?
I mean, certainly, as an illustrator, that became the guy that's behind like a digital version of a camera. You definitely gravitate towards really good composition, really good imageries earlier on. When I was younger, I was heavily into comic books, and at some point I was like drawing my own comic books. And so that within itself is like a practice in different framing, composition, different formats. And definitely, I think it's in my college years that I transitioned more from like the comic world into motion art, into cinema. That becomes more of something that I look at, like people be like, "Hey Gary, have you seen the original Blade Runner?" And before college, I was never really that into cinema, and I was going and study like old Kurosawa films, and from or like Apocalypse Now, or there's Stanley Kubrick's films. I think really the experience of Lucasfilm, college, that starts to kind of get much more things to think about on like why films are shot a certain way. Jurassic Park was like something that kind of was the reason why I got into the industry. It was just, I was blown away by the craft of what make believe could be.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a natural progression of that, the type of art I gravitate towards. So your Jurassic Park, The Matrix,
that was a big one for me.
Like stuff that are kind of bigger than life, fantasized world, that it's just stuff that like wows my, child, like boyhood fantasy of like this sci-fi thing. And then, you later on watching stuff that are develop an appetite for things that's a little bit more sophisticated. That's no longer about those spectacles. Like for a while I was into J.J. Abrams' sensibility, with very
Fringe.
Like exactly, Fringe. Fringe is a great one. Alias was a great one. Like things that are very dynamic, quick cuts, fast moving, camera shakes, lens flare, blah blah blah, and then you kind of nowadays I'm really into, something that doesn't get disturbed as much. You're really seeing the shot for its composition, like a lot of Denis Villeneuve's films, that there's sense of tension just in that quietness, the stillness. Like you get more when the camera isn't moving, right? Yeah. Like whereas JJ is like, you get more because camera is moving. And obviously the inspirations, Roger Deakins, Emmanuel Lubensky, Gravity, Children of Man, those own.
Children of Man was huge when that joint came out. Oh my God.
And it didn't do well. A lot of people didn't even see it. But he was like a cinematic explosion. That it was just so unique, so raw, and how they're able to achieve it. Emmanuel Lubensky actually came to DreamWorks, and that was during the time that I was working at DreamWorks, to kind of give a talk on the camera sensibility and blah blah blah. Super cool guy, and I wish that one day I met him at that time because of that talk. But he had talked about how every film he does, it comes down to the rules that he's putting and the way he wants to make sure that the camera has a camera rule to the
like film. The restrictions.
Restrictions, yeah. Children of Man never has like a helicopter shot. All the shots, a majority of them are shot by like people height. And it's all those things that you later on watch a film again after listening to him. I go, wow, that's like, he's totally true. There's like intention behind this. So I think what gets me excited these days is to look at the material and to look at what this material invites me to do, right? Like deconstruct the material based on either the tone or the type of character or the character dynamics of the character. So when you have those two characters on camera, how are you composing, right? What kind of feeling you want to get? Or like there's certain, the introductions of a character. Do you want him to have a big present, small present? How much of the frame you're giving, a frame real estate you're giving it to him. So just kind of deconstruct a material into visual components and try to tie them into how you shoot it, and then try to find a cohesive language that doesn't make it feel like this is a film that's shot by 5 different, intentions, right?
Right.
So that's, yes, but I think the influence definitely changed over time. It went from something that's more eye candy to something that I'm understanding why these films, or like why Stanley Kubrick, why The Shining is being studied so much, right? Like, one is that centralized composition that's making me so uncomfortable, like why, like how does it invoke certain emotion?
Yeah.
The whole thing of that conversation is very, very fascinating to me. And I'm definitely learning still, I'm still on the, I like to think that I'm at the beginning of my journey, yeah, I don't know if that answers.
No, totally. And honestly, to your point about rules, this will be the 75th episode that I've name dropped David Fincher, but I studied him a lot.
Dave, yeah, he's a huge influence of mine, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of impossible to ignore him at this point, but he said something a while ago. I think it was for the game commentary, but I heard it in college and it didn't make any fucking sense to me. He said, when you can do anything, when the audience knows you can do anything, it's more important about what you don't do. And in my head, I just could not get what that meant. I was like, what do you mean you don't? Like, you don't do everything. And it's like, yeah, but you got to narrow down that slice. And it's like, what, it's those rules that Emmanuel was talking about. It's like, what, if you can move the camera anywhere, where don't you put the camera? That will inform what your style is and what your storytelling is, what your language is, more so than huge spectacle and stuff. And I also think it comes down to like a maturity thing, like, because I'm kind of in the same boat where now I'm more interested in those sort of locked off camera, character driven things than the films that inspired me, like your Fight Club or your Matrix or,
Fight Club,
Men in Black.
Right.
Yeah. And those like animated films or high sci-fi action films that like really got me into film that I still love. I mean, they're still my favorite genre by far, but now I'm more willing to watch Criterion stuff now as an adult.
Like you said, is mentally stimulating versus like walking into, a lot of films today where before you start the first frame, you already know what's going to happen. You already know, characters will be fine. They're going to win. There's a final battle. And David Fincher is definitely a huge influence, like Fight Club, Zodiac. His sensibility is, I think, the Girl with Dragon Tattoo, all of that. And I love the fact that him and Tim Miller are doing these producing these like Love, Death and Robot series.
Such a great series.
It's just super cool. Like, I'd love to be able to participate, in one of those projects. And for some reason, he's always able to, like, even though I have no idea what his age is, probably he's much older than me, but he just always seems so fresh still. Like, at the cusp of what's new, what's technology. I don't think he's ever, he's just such a unique filmmaker that, I remember one of his, another quote is, there's only one way to shoot a scene, the right way. Right. Right. And you're like,
the other way is,
oh my God. It's like, okay, tell me that you know what you're doing,
It is, that's something that I've kind of like taken to heart, actually, is like, we all know the correct way to do it, or the way that something should be done, and it's very easy to give yourself an excuse not to do it that way. Oh, that would take too much time, it'd take too much money, it'd be whatever. And it's like, all right, we'll find a way. Like, find a way to do it the right way. Otherwise, what are you doing? But speaking of, that's another guy who previses the shit out of his films. I know Panic Room specifically was like, there's an entire, that film exists in an animated form as well.
I believe there was like the DP on Zodiac, I think, which is blinking out on the name.
It wasn't Cronenweth, right? It was
No, it's not Jeff Cronenweth. Cronenweth is kind of it's someone that Fincher's worked with many times, but I think
looking it up. Oh, you know why? Is no. Harrisavitis.
There you go. I guess I've heard, because I know people who worked on Zodiac, I heard he really, a lot of times, doesn't like to work with David Fincher because of how surgical he is. With, everything is already pre-boarded, so he just show up to place the camera there to match the storyboard. Some DPs like to be spontaneous, want to take the camera, move it around, do different things. I think it's just everyone subjectively have their own method of doing things.
I got to interview Eric Messerschmidt for Devotion, and I didn't want, because I'm a big Fincher fan, I made sure not to ask about it until he brought it up, because I'm sure every interview he's ever done, they're like, so anyway, Mindhunter. But he seems to like that workflow. I don't want to speak for him, but he did seem to think that it makes, because he came up through the lighting department too. So I think he likes, and I could see why this would be attractive, because I think I would like this too, is you, instead of having to be so on edge about what you're doing as a DP, you can kind of sit back and put out fires and oversee departments, and it takes a lot off your shoulders, and you can take more of a logistical role that the DP still has to do anyway. And you can focus on those logistics more of getting the shot that the director wants versus having to come up with them, which some people might find not chill. Some people want to impart their look on the thing, and some people are happy to be a part of the process. I feel like I kind of fit in that latter camp. I don't necessarily.
I can see that too.
I look on something.
On a personal level, I've worked with directors that wants to explore, wants to do things. Or I kind of get a sense of what this sequence should be. You guys go and start shooting. We'll get your footage, piece it together in edit room, and you have someone like Ang Lee who is literally sitting next to me, going, "We want the camera to be 4 feet off the ground. 50 millimeter shooting pies. 3/4 of the back face, and the sun is at 45, 38 degree angle." And I just became his hand and his eyes in kind of crafting these shots. In both scenarios, equally satisfying, because ultimately we're here to serve the director's vision. There's a lot of, I definitely have friends that get on shows where just we don't get to be creative. But I think ultimately you find ways to serve that film for the director. Yeah, that's the craft. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like too, if you have enough of those gigs where you don't get to execute your creativity, you can find music videos or shorts or something where you have
you just go make your own project. Totally.
Not that it's that easy, but there is outlets. What was I going to say? Because I know I got to let you go here. We're kind of going a little over time, but it had something to do with animation.
Yeah, 2:30. I have a meeting. But
out. Okay, we'll get you out so you can prepare for that. What was the last thing you worked on? Because I know I didn't. So I just say yes to every interview because I found everyone's an amazing person to talk to. I can't remember why they emailed what project technically you're supposed to be promoting.
It's Magician's Elephant.
It was Magician's Elephant. Okay, cool. Yeah, and that's on Netflix, right?
Yes, it's on Netflix. It's coming out on 17th this month. And
cool.
I had a previs on that project. He was working with director Wendy Rogers, who I've had a relationship with prior, who was a visual effects supervisor. And because of that, it was such a shorthand to be able to work with her and communicate. And her and the producer, Julia Pister, were both having, live action background. Julia, in fact, Witches and Elephants her first animated project.
Oh, cool.
And Witches and Elephant at one point was going to be a live action film, by the way. But at some point they pivoted into an animated project. But because of their live action background, there's just a lot of shorthands that we have in terms of communicating, the language. The entire cast of that film is like a human world, human space. So we really tried to shoot it and kind of utilizing like a physical camera that behaves in a live action, shoot. More than that was something that we leaned on for that project. Cool. Yeah, so it's coming out. It was with production designer Max Boas. It was with the editor Robert Fisher, who edited Spider-Verse.
Oh, there you go.
So
talk about an animated film.
Yeah, no, it's a group of very talented people. It was one project that worked entirely in my sweatpants because of pandemic, and I couldn't think of a better group of people to be doing that. Because in pandemic, I think even now that we look back, we can joke about these things, but during that time it was kind of worrisome and scary because we're like, where the world is going, they're just some of the best people that I've had the chance to work with, and it's really, really, and pandemic aside, is a sophisticated project in the sense that it's not a bombastic animated film that's trying to get you to some sort of like final battle resolution. It's very nuanced because it was based on a live action script. So it's really about character relationships. And it's a beautifully designed world as well.
Well, it's kind of a lovely film, isn't it? It's not like from what the bit I saw looking it up, like it's kind of a nice, it must have been a pleasant thing to work on versus like being in the pandemic and having to work on, I don't know, something like Annihilation. I'm sure could be like, well, yeah, it's everywhere.
Oh, it's so positive. You're totally right. You hit it nail on the head. It's a positive film, a sweet film, a rom-com-ish, in terms of tone that during pandemic and also the election, also during that whole time, there was just a lot of stress in this world. And I feel like Witches Elephant was a good antidote to that. It's a good headspace to be in, for sure.
Yeah, we were all perpetually online during the worst possible time to be online.
I know. Go ahead. Yes.
Oh no, I was going to wrap it up. What were you going to say?
Oh no. I feel that now I'm going to go and start listening to your podcast.
Oh, cool. Well, I would love to have
doing this, by the way.
This is the third year.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're well along. We've had amazing guests that you're among. Very happy with how the show's been going. So hopefully at one point I would like a sponsor. I would like to get paid to do this at some point. It's about 100. I think you'll probably be episode 100 or somewhere near there. And if anyone's listening, I want money. But
let's put it out there. Yes.
Yeah, put the feelers out there. But I would love to have you back on it because I actually a lot more things I've thought about that I'd love to talk about, especially like your time at Lucasfilm and like kind of the soft tools that you must have been given there. A friend of mine works with Adam Savage of the Mythbusters, and he often has little tidbits that he got at Industrial Light and Magic. Yeah.
It's such a unique, I love the fact that show existed. It became a thing. It's super cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is like the most casual conversation I've had, and I love this format. It's one of the things that you're like, oh man, is this like a really official thing? Is it really serious? And thanks for being so accommodative and friendly through this conversation.
Of course. Yeah, I'll let you get your meeting, but please keep in touch, and we'll well, fuck, you live in LA. We'll just grab a beer or something.
Yeah, please reach out. No, please, let's do that. And yeah, go watch the film March 17th.
Oh, yeah.
And and check out my work on my website, GaryHlee.com. Yeah,
absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care. Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F@R Mapbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.